guys, welcome back to another SpaceXplr episode. This is episode 66, as you see here, and we have a very special guest on today's show. If you're looking to learn more about space medicine, we had a couple more guests on the show, but we're going to give you a little bit different takes. Again, personal opinion, different research, because the topic is really, really big. And today's guest is Eleonor Frost. So she's a recent graduate from UCL with a honors degree in physics and medical physics. Currently studying medicine in Scotland. Her experience in space medicine started with teaching and mentoring by Dr. Kevin Fong on UCL Space Medicine and Extreme Environmental Physiology course. So alongside this, her thesis researching the feasibility and design of Microgravity Surgical Workstation has won the UK-wide competition and gold medal at the International IAC in Washington, D.C. So congratulations on that. So last year, she was working as a research assistant in ISET, if we can say that, developing microbiology experiments designing by school students, which launched to ISS in spring 2019. She's also the lead for two research groups, CGAC-SMLS working group, researching how to study ICP changes in microgravity and parabolades, defining pre-flight medical checks for suborbital spaceflight. As an avid STEM ambassador, she has enjoyed going into the Science Museum and school across London to talk about space exploration to over 200 students. Eleonor works on AMSRO Women in Aerospace Medicine group as a student leader and social media coordinator, and is vice lead for the SGAC SMLS group. So many complicated names here, but I hope you if you missed something, go and read through it again. That's all going to be and more in the show notes, which of course Twitter link, and if we can find something else is going to be included there. So you should go and follow up with her and ask any questions about space medicine. So without longer further ado, Eleonor, thank you for joining me today on this episode.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, there's a lot of acronyms in the space industry, so hopefully you'll start getting used to them.
Exactly. Probably NASA started it, NASA.
Exactly.
So, okay. So can you talk about, because I love hearing stories. So I love people's stories because I would love to hear your story. How did you ended up, working with all these different research groups and, projects, and where was it kind of this big bang moment for you personally in your personal journey?
So for me, it was actually during my undergraduate degree, which isn't very common. A lot of people usually just dream of it from when they were really young. But I guess as many children, I was always saying I wanted to be an astronaut. And then as you grow up, you kind of lose sight of that dream because I thought it was impossible. But then when I was in my undergraduate degree, I realized that there was a lot of scientists that were astronauts and started looking into it a bit more and realizing you don't have to be a pilot and you don't have to be in the army anymore and that kind of thing. So it was a bit more accessible. And then reading about space tourism and sort of the direction that's taking, how it'll be even more accessible very soon. I think that's when I started to realize I could actually do something in the space industry, and space medicine was just a perfect sort of marrying of the passions I have for space, but also how that affects the body. And so I'm doing a medical degree at the moment, so it works well with all the research that I wanted to do.
Exactly. So can you just explain us how different is space medicine comparing to the medicine that we have here on the planet?
So in some ways it's very different, as you can imagine, but it's actually also quite similar. So the two branches of space medicine, I would say, is how space medicine can help people on Earth and how people on Earth can help astronauts up in space. And the main parts of that is that when you're up in space, you're under microgravity. So they do a lot of research on the effects of microgravity on the human body, which is quite a unique perspective to give us because the medicine we do on Earth is always under the force of gravity. So it's kind of seeing how does the body work in microgravity and what does that mean about how gravity helps us to function as humans, which we didn't know until very recently, which is quite a strange thought. There's also a lot of research in like pharmaceuticals as well, as you get a bit further from the sort of physiology side, which is the main focus, but then there's pharmaceutical work and sort of work on bacteria in space and that kind of thing, which is all crucial to helping astronauts survive up there and helping us in future missions and on the Mars and the moon and that kind of stuff. Space medicine is basically how to keep humans alive in space. and also make sure that they come back healthy when they get to Earth, that they have the muscle mass and the bone strength to get up and walk around and go back to their sort of normal lives, if that's what you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. So, because it is a little bit different, like once you're going to be there. So maybe you can talk about the what type of research, like if there was any like groundbreaking moments achieved so far, doing any type of, research when it comes to space medicine, let's say in ISS so far. Was any of that like happening? I'm sure there's a lot of that happening on ISS, but maybe you can share a few projects and kind of groundbreaking moments if we achieved any.
Yeah, so the two that come to mind, they'll be different for everyone who is in space medicine because there's new research coming out all the time. The two that come to mind for me, the first one was the genetics research that they got to do with Scott Kelly on the twin study, and that was really there was a whole paper and multiple papers since that have been published about the changes that they saw between him and his brother. But one of the ones that, because I've been learning about genetics on Earth in my medical degree recently, and kind of going back and reading about the genetics in space is really interesting, and seeing how on Earth, as you age, so the telomeres, which are like little caps on your chromosomes, like a little cap on your DNA, that's meant to shorten, and that means that the cell knows how old it is as such, and that's why cells die and you age and that kind of thing. But they actually started to find that, very roughly speaking, Scott Kelly's sort of the little caps started extending, so his cells would theoretically live longer. But that's a sort of very simple way of putting it. But that was a really interesting thing. No one had really thought about what space would do to your genetics and DNA, but everyone thought it would be quite detrimental because of the radiation. And it was really interesting to actually get some proof of what happens. And then the other important one that's really been occurring recently is, since we've been doing 1-year missions, we've seen that microgravity also has an effect on the astronauts' sight. So some of them start losing a bit of the depth perception in their sight, and they even send up a pair of glasses for all the astronauts, just in case they start losing sight when they're up in space. It tends to sort of come back to normal where it's down on Earth, but they don't know 100% why that's happening, because one of the tests they'd want to do is to measure the pressure inside the head, because when you're in microgravity, a lot of your fluids kind of float up, because most of our fluids in gravity is sort of pulled down into our legs, but in microgravity there's no such thing. So that's why astronauts look like they have a really puffy red face, and they call it puffy face red chicken leg syndrome, which is quite an interesting one. I think that's the unofficial term now. So they were thinking all this extra fluid means that the pressure is building up in the head, and so that's pushing on the eye and giving them some different sort of conditions in the eye. And they started doing tests on that and seeing that they could even see sometimes folds in the back of the eye and that kind of thing that they'd never really thought about. And that's only because we've been sending humans up to space recently for over the 6 months that they used to. So I can only imagine what we're going to discover when we start sending them for 3 years on the Mars missions and that kind of thing. So those are the two big ones that come to mind.
Got it. So we're talking again about a problem which is quite difficult to solve, probably, microgravity. So can we talk about how we can mitigate the risk of, let's say, as we talked about, you mentioned, bone loss, density, loss in that, and a muscle, just general muscle mass loss. Is there any ways that we can mitigate that through some sort of technology or space medicine, or what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of space medicine is about countermeasures. So that's whether you do a countermeasure to sort of counter the effects when you're still on Earth. So that's why astronauts are in peak physical fitness. They do a lot of exercise down on Earth, and they're all very healthy human beings. And they're selected to be that way, because if you start very healthy, then you can only go so low, really. But when you start sending people that have medical conditions like space tourists, that's a whole different story. So one of the countermeasures starts at the selection process, and then throughout their training, they're all trained on the different protocols they do. So their nutrition is really monitored. And then when you go up to the ISS, they're doing exercise for about 2 hours a day, which is quite long when you think about it. I know I've been getting into my home workouts with the lockdown and stuff, but I haven't been exercising for 2 hours a day. And I think that's a big part of what they know they need to do in order to come back and be able to function sort of normally and take less time to recover. But they all still take time to recover. So They all have a physio program when they get back. I think they do about 30 days of rehab to try and get back to the level that they were before. And then it's completely dependent on the astronaut. Different astronauts sort of rehab in different timelines, and some of them take a long time to get the sort of bone density back or the muscle mass back, and some of them don't take as long. It really depends on the individual, and I think that's something that they're trying to work out the best way to sort of benefit the most of the astronauts. But I think they've learned a lot since the Apollo missions, and the Apollo missions were a lot shorter. So every time we're learning how to look after them better, we're sending them up for longer, which is changing the issues, and we're going to have to learn again. So that's one of the interesting sides of space medicine, is it's constantly changing. And with space tourism as well, that will change a lot of the landscape that we see right now.
Exactly. So, I mean, with the Scott Kelly story, I love it because I watched the documentary not that long ago, I think a good month ago, and there was him, and I kind of remember there was a second guy that was a Russian, and they both kind of spent, I think he spent 340 days, I think
Yeah,
something like that
something
in
like that. It
space.
was
Yeah.
close to, yeah, it was close to a
Yeah.
year pretty much.
So I mean, so far from what we got, I think there's another Russian who spent more time. I think it's 500 days or something. As far as again, just looking at the Scott Kelly and that Russian situation, did we see any kind of long-term negative effects after being that long in microgravity?
I think as with all astronauts, they actually just keep monitoring them throughout their lives. So they keep doing tests and all that, to getting them regular checkups. And I think there's a few papers they've recently released on the older astronauts and how long it's taken for them to sort of recover fully, but also if there's any increased risk of cancers and that kind of thing, which they haven't found. I don't think with Scott Kelly it's been long enough for them to publish any of that. So as far as I know, there haven't been any long-term effects that he should be worried about. But it's also quite hard to know what to look for when you have no idea what the long-term effects could be for a one-year mission. So I think they just generally try and monitor everything, and then try and keep track of how he's doing. But as far as I know, there's no extreme long-term effects.
And how much do you think we should leave everything just for the universe, for natural evolution? We just kind of have to be just like bacteria. We have to adapt to the different circumstances, and that has to be done through hundreds, maybe thousands of years. So let's say we created a colony on a different planet, different gravity comparing to the Earth. So, and like, should we look at it from this perspective? Okay, some people will not handle it, because we don't have a medicine or technology to keep everybody alive in these kind of circumstances. So how much of that it should be like this type of futuristic, or whatever you can call it, outlook, and we should say, okay, let's keep it to the evolution. We just have to adapt to it, like no matter what.
I think coming from the medical side, probably the ethics of saying that some people won't survive and that doesn't matter kind of thing. I'm not sure I'd want to join a mission that was along those lines, but that is a fair point. If you look at the sort of timeline that we've had to evolve and the conditions that we've had to evolve to, then you could think that if we sent a colony out to Mars, then they might evolve eventually. But I think if we don't give them the basic to sort of survive, which is the oxygen first of all, I think in terms of the gravity level, they're interested to see how that affects the body, but it will definitely, there is 1/3 gravity, I think, so it will definitely be different to the ISS, for example, where there's none. The thing with Mars, the main issue, I think, and right now the sort of mission critical problem that they haven't solved that would cancel any mission is the radiation level, and that they haven't really worked out the best, most cost efficient, as well as sort of logical way of protecting the astronauts from the radiation. But in terms of the gravity level, then we might see some interesting adaptations. I think another thing with the Mars missions will be the psychological side, and that's sort of a smaller part of space medicine, but definitely something a lot of people are looking into. And that'd be a really interesting one that we can't really simulate on the ISS or anything. Sort of not having the ability to see home and it just being like a dot in the sky could have some pretty profound effects that we don't really know until we get there or try and simulate it as best we can.
And what do you think again? Because like I love the fact that you mentioned, psychology as well, because I do believe this is probably the biggest problem as far as I see it. Again, I'm not an expert at space medicine or just in space industry, but I think that would be kind of the biggest threshold for us as people, because there is definitely technology or space medicine that we didn't invent it yet, but we probably can pull this off, by, just with the time. But are we ready psychologically to even to make that type of move? And what do you think? Who should be the first people? What type of astronauts? If you're talking about putting a lot of people, 1,000 people on Mars, what about, because you mentioned it's very kind of the level for somebody to become an astronaut, it's really really high when it comes to, again, physical kind of psychological state. So what do you think is going to happen again with those people, and where we can find those people? What about the thresholds? I know there's a lot of questions, but what do you think about this entire colonization part of the Mars?
In terms of the colonization side of things, when you're looking at space medicine, you still want them to be in sort of peak condition, and you don't want to just send the people that sign up, because some of the people that sign up wouldn't survive or wouldn't have a great time of it. I think there's not much space medicine research on the colony side of things, I think, because people see it as being so far down the line, and it's also very hard to get good research results on the sort of 6 astronauts that we have up on the ISS at a time, that kind of thing. So if you're looking at scientific study, you want to test lots of people and sort of replicate the conditions and the controls and everything. And with space research, that's a limitation. So they're already very wary of making blanket statements. For example, when you publish a paper, you always have to make it very clear that this was only data from a few missions or a few astronauts or that kind of thing. So extrapolating that to a whole population, I don't think I've really seen any research that goes that far. But in the psychology side, that is something that they can probably look at on a bigger scale. And I know a lot of the sort of experts that were looking into space psychology have sort of changed their focus during the pandemic, and they're doing a lot of research with the lockdown and how that's affecting people, because there's a lot we can learn from that, really, because it's isolation, for the sort of long isolation that Mars colonizers would have. And that's definitely an interesting one.
People are going crazy as far as I see it right now. The research, the research is not going well so far.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there are a lot of other factors involved, so I can imagine that the papers will be very interesting to read when they try and summarize the events of 2020 and the kind of stresses that people have had to put up with. But yeah, I think the psychology side is definitely an interesting one. It's not one that, unfortunately, I know much about, and there are lots of experts out there who are researching it and doing analogs as well in Antarctica, and there are sort of space analogs in Hawaii and that kind of thing. But it's as you say, it will definitely be a limiting factor in whoever we send to Mars and why we send them and for how long and that kind of thing.
So, like, how far off are we from pulling this off? Because now, again, we have the Artemis mission. A lot of people looking forward to that. It's great, like, for our generation, as far as seeing you're really young still, So, like, we never seen a moon landing before, unless it's on YouTube, on social media. So seeing that live, and again, with this type of technology that we have, kind of HD cameras, which I'm sure is going to place on an astronaut, maybe helmet, on spaceship. So it's going to be pretty incredible to see those moments, for this generation. What I'm sure it's going to inspire a lot of people, which I'm very excited to that. But do you see that happening again? Because with the COVID entire situation, again, probably the moon is kind of the closest approach, and they talked about creating a moon base, and that's what the Artemis is kind of for. And so do you think like this is like 10 years ahead, 20 years ahead? Because, with everything with the space industry is kind of slow. So what do you think should be the timeline for the moon and for the Mars, like where we should expect it?
I think the moon landings will be awesome, and I am optimistic that they will sort of be within, however, the next 10 years, I'd say. In terms of the Mars missions, it's really hard to tell. I know NASA are constantly sort of putting out different timelines, but from my point of view, which is sort of the more like human side of it, there's a lot of issues that we haven't solved, in terms of the radiation, also in terms of the fact that they're going to have to travel there for 6 months in a tiny capsule, and they won't have access to the kind of exercise equipment or all of the things they have access to on the ISS for their 6 months missions, let alone 6 months. And then you have to be in a good enough physical condition to get out of the capsule and go around Mars and sort of fulfill all of their tasks there. having had limited access to the kind of things that the ISS have. So if you look at astronauts coming back from the ISS now, they're carried out of the Soyuz capsule and they can't really do much. And you imagine that they're going to be arriving in Mars at that level, or even maybe a bit less, because they haven't had a treadmill, a bike, and a sort of resistance machine to work out. So they'll arrive on Mars in pretty bad condition, and then there'll be no one there to carry them out and do the tests and do the sort of medicine and look after them and get them back into sort of the right space to then start carrying out the experiments they need to do. So the Mars timeline, I wouldn't really be able to say realistically, but that's probably just because I'm being pessimistic. I think in terms of the tourism side and how accessible space will be to the common sort of person like you or I, that's the most exciting side with that is the parabolic stuff. So the commercial, we've got Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin promising a lot, but they are also delivering quite a bit. And I don't know how the pandemic will affect that, but they were getting some really cool results and some flights in as well with Beth Moses, who was their sort of chief astronaut trainer, who was classed as a space tourist or space flight party commercial astronaut, I think she was. And that's an interesting one that I'm very optimistic will be in our lifetime as well. And that will be really cool, because then you'll be bringing up anyone who buys a ticket, you'll bring up to space, and they'll get, I think it's 5 minutes of weightlessness on Virgin Galactic and about 10 minutes on Blue Origin. So that would be some really exciting developments. And I think that's where space medicine will start to develop very fast, because there's commercial companies that have an interest, so they'll be putting money into that kind of research.
So when we're talking about space tourism, we're talking about just flying in a kind of lower orbit, staying there for 5 minutes and coming back. We're not talking about going to Mars and to Mars and Moon and staying there for a week, right?
Not yet. Yeah, there is actually talk as well of going to the ISS, I think, for like a holiday and that kind of thing. And there have actually been, I think it's 7 sort of private astronauts or private space tourists. They haven't really defined what to call all of these people and what sort of altitude they've been to and what they're called. There have been 7 sort of people who just paid to go for a week. And so those were the original space tourists, but there wasn't much in the media about it and stuff, because I don't know how much they paid, but it would have been a couple million, I think.
Yeah, probably, yeah. So yeah, it's a very interesting subject, because a lot of people, I think they would love to go there, because I think I had one of the guests on the shows, and he has the book, and the book is called Space is Open for Business. So as far as I'm seeing it, like, are we looking to treat space as a business? Because I've seen a couple articles before, like crazy titles, $100 trillion worth asteroid, gold asteroid, we're going to mine that. So should we treat space as a business? Because when we're thinking about colonizing, maybe the word, because I just don't like the word, but a lot of people use it, colonizing Mars or creating moon base. And, should we look at it from a business perspective? Okay, can we extrapolate any income, money from that, create like space tourism? Or should we just kind of do this for purpose of being multiplanetary species, and because it's cool, it's fun, it sounds very interesting? What do you think? Should we look at it as a business still, or what type of universal kind of approach and view we should have on all of this?
I think personally, my take on sort of it has to be a balance between the two, and that's just because I've seen the commercial companies pushing a lot of new innovation and get it, like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic have been doing some really interesting stuff, but there definitely probably does need to be a bit of regulation on them. And I don't know where that would come from. I think that's more under the remit of space law, if anyone wants to get into that. It's quite a big field. But how do you hold them accountable, and what repercussions does it have if they do something that isn't in the rules, that kind of thing? Because once you open it up and just say it's sort of blanket, anyone can do what they want, I think that would be dangerous, and that would probably not end very well, given how we've looked after the Earth. I think there definitely needs to be some kind of regulation somewhere from someone, but unfortunately I don't have the answer. In the medicine side for the space tourism, that's a big question, because you've got these commercial companies that want to sell tickets just like airline companies do. But the flight is very different to just jumping on a plane. So you'll get people that buy tickets. Those that can afford it are often older, might have a few medical conditions. And then the question is, if they bought a ticket, do you do the medical on them and tell them, oh, you probably shouldn't fly, it would be quite dangerous? Or are you allowed to tell them, no, we'll have to refund your ticket because we don't want you to fly, it's too dangerous? Because then the commercial company sort of limits who they can sell tickets to, don't they? And unfortunately, they need to sell the tickets because that's the whole point.
The business suffers, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it needs to be a balance, and they haven't spoken yet about whether they will sort of be a go or no go in terms of people having medical conditions that means they can't fly, or whether they'll just very strongly advise you not to fly and that kind of thing. It's quite a fine line that I think they definitely need to establish before they start bringing people up.
And what do you think about, again, the issue of, because right now with our Artemis mission, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember exactly the number, but somebody told me the number of, that was kilograms, pounds, the way you want to take it, the measurement, but that was on basically on this kit, on the medicine kit that they can take to the moon, once they're going to be there. And so that means they have kind of limited supply of these, very needed kind of, medicine, type of, so what about getting resupplied? That we're looking at that, is it going to be ISS, or maybe it's going to be, let's say we're having a few astronauts or multiple astronauts on the Mars. How are they going to get resupplied with this space medicine?
Yeah, so that's a huge part of the medicine that will go into the longer distance missions, is deciding what you take with you and whether it's worth it. Because as with any sort of space program, they did it with the ISS and they did it with the Apollo missions, you always have to trade off between how heavy something is, because then it'll cost more to fly because you'll need more fuel, how much space it takes up because you're limited in very small spaces. So there's a whole branch of NASA sort of putting together all the medical equipment that you would ideally take and then trying to cut it down to fit into the space that NASA have given for medical equipment. I think some of the innovation that's coming out of that, though, is the stuff like 3D printing of drugs, 3D printing of tools, that kind of thing. So you could just bring a 3D printer and then you have access to a lot more. And there's some really, really interesting research that will make a huge difference to medicine on Earth that is coming out of that issue. Because also it's the kind of the same issue that you have practicing medicine in extreme environments or really isolated areas. You're going to need to have the perfect medical kit that really can try and treat all the possible things that could happen, which is a lot when you're dealing with the human body. So I think it'll be a trade-off, and unfortunately then they might make the wrong decision and they'd have to fly out resupplies. I don't think that would be too much of an issue with the moon, because sort of flights there don't take as long, but I think for Mars that would definitely be an issue. And then you'd have to start also talking about whether you have to send a surgeon with every crew or two surgeons in case the surgeon is the one that gets injured, or a doctor. And that, yeah, there's a lot of considerations that go into the longer term mission. So I think using the moon as a test bed is definitely a good idea, because it's close enough that if they did need an evacuation, then most of the things that can go wrong in terms of the medicine side, you can evacuate and get back to Earth and treat it as best you can. But with the Mars missions, you definitely will be a lot more isolated, and astronauts will have to make the decisions.
Exactly. As you said, yeah, there's a lot of different scenarios. Probably half of that we don't even think about because we've never been in this type of environment before. I mean, for a long time. So those unknown type of factors and scenarios will always come, and of course, there's a lot of great scientists on NASA and all the, agencies and private companies, really smart people, probably one in a million, one in a billion, some of them, but, we're still going to find some difficulties. And, I'm sure there will be some, AI technology that will help us to kind of calculate the risks and, all of those good stuff. But what about, again, having those worst case scenarios? So let's say somebody has, a problem where you need to have kind of open surgery, like how that can be done. I mean, in this type of, microgravity or less, like 1/3 of a gravity just here, like on a planet, like, are we doing any research towards that, like on ISS or somebody else? And what do you think is going to happen with those type of scenarios?
I think there's definitely research going on in that area in terms of what we can do realistically. So my dissertation was on designing a surgical suite for microgravity. And it was really interesting doing the research for that, because in the literature there hasn't been much, and a lot of it has basically all been tested on parabolic flights. So you only get sort of, I think it's 30 seconds of microgravity. I'm not 100% sure. But a lot of the research that they did with doing surgery in space wasn't actually in space, it was in parabolic flights. I think they will have done some on the ISS that hasn't been published yet. And it would be interesting to see if they do release those before they start doing missions further. But surgery in space is definitely a solution that we need to find, because right now, because of the fluid behavior in space, then if you sort of cut yourself, or if there's any trauma, then if your artery starts bleeding, you will just keep bleeding because it won't, because of the microgravity, it will just sort of come out in a jet of droplets because of the forces acting on it. There's no gravity and you sort of had to try and hold it down and that kind of thing. But you could quite easily lose a lot of blood. Add that to the fact that you're not in the best sort of physical state because you've got a suppressed immune system, and you've also got a lower blood volume up in space because your body's getting rid of blood volume because of all this fluid. It thinks it's got too much blood, so it's getting rid of blood volume. And then if you start losing some, then you could start to have some pretty big issues quite quickly. I think they do train astronauts on sort of basic response to any kind of injury, that kind of thing. I think they also train them on dental work, very basic sort of dental work. So something we'll probably have to work on a lot more for the Moon and Mars missions, because right now they have the safety net of knowing that they can just come home and within 24 hours they'll be in a hospital, or they can also call up an expert and have pretty much real-time communication with someone that can talk them through a procedure or something. And with the Moon, the communication delay isn't as bad, so that will still be a bit of a safety net. But with Mars, it could be up to 45 minutes of saying, okay, I've done this, what do I do next? And often in surgery, you don't really have that luxury. So then the other idea is also they're developing a lot of robots to do some of the surgery in space, and that has some incredible applications on Earth. So it's a growing field, I think, space surgery. There's just a new space surgery sort of organization that's been founded over in the US so that like-minded people can get together and talk about the research they're doing and future directions they want to take. So that's another interesting one. And that's why I love space medicine, is I keep sort of telling you about this new thing that's growing and that everyone's talking about. So there's something for everyone. And if you're interested in surgery, then space surgery is a great one.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic because, and that's why I wanted to have you on, because, like, I don't think people again paying enough attention, because I spoke with multiple people who are involved in the space medicine, and everybody kind of give me similar answers to yours, because there's still so much unknown in this industry, in this particular category, and people doing, of course, a lot of research in that. But there's a lot. There's a lot. So first of all, because I love the fact that, again, that is going to benefit the planet at the same time, because there's so much different technology that's been created because of the space flights, just like a CAT scan. It's part of that, because we have it because of the space flight. So it's very interesting to see where is it going to happen. But I think a lot of people, including myself, are sometimes frustrated with the rate of kind of innovation, and of course that's always come down to the budget and the way governments divide the share, who's going to get the money, and but that's different. That's a little bit of politics involved right there, but it's definitely a problem. So can you talk about the parabolades again? Because I heard that somewhere, but can you talk about what's that and what type of work are you doing there as well?
Yeah, so that's a group we founded with 3 other students. So we've got 2 medical students. One of them has a PhD in medical physics, and we've also got a student who is in working biosciences who's now working full time. And we founded that for the Student Aerospace Challenge, and I think you've had a few people on here that did that. So it's just this challenge where students can get together and put together a thesis as a group, essentially on different topics. And so we did our research on the pre-flight checks that you'll need for medical tourists, or rather sort of tourists that will only do the parabolic flight. So you only get 3 minutes of microgravity and that kind, and 3 geoforces. So it's not as extreme as the Moon and Mars for tourists, but it's the first step. And they haven't yet published the kind of pre-flight checks that they'll put them through. So it was just researching our own sort of idea of what pre-flight checks that we should do to make sure that the people that we do send on these parabolic flights will be okay and hopefully have a good time with it. And since then we've
Could you give some examples, like what type of checklist there currently is existing to make sure that we can mitigate the risk of injury or something happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's pretty much a very thorough medical exam. So you need to take a full history and find out, for example, if someone has a history of kidney stones, then you need to check that they don't have any current kidney stones, because the G-forces that they'll be put under could sort of shake those loose, and that would be very painful in flight. Also, any history of sort of bone density issues or that kind of thing. For example, if you've got osteoporosis, then that could be an issue because you're being put under 3G forces, and then microgravity, and then 3G on the way back again. So it was a thorough history, and then suggesting a few sort of exams that you would naturally take on to investigate something further. We also did sort of talk about the psychology side of it, because that was one that came out. We did a questionnaire asking experts what they thought we should include, and a lot of people said that anxiety or claustrophobia could be a big issue that people haven't really thought to highlight. But once you're on this sort of quite small plane going at very high speeds, and then you get to the top of the parabola and you see the curvature of the Earth, and some people, it could definitely have some psychological effects on people that weren't expecting it. Or, I mean, it's a unique experience that a lot of astronauts say was pretty life-changing. So it was another one that we hadn't really considered, but the psychology side of how people would deal with the space tourism flight was really interesting. And it was, yeah, just generally looking at essentially what GPs know about. So when you're a general doctor, what do you know about your patient? And then how does a certain condition react to sort of the microgravity portion or the high gravity portion, which will actually often be longer. And 3G forces aren't that high that you need special training on how to deal with them, but it would definitely be an alien sensation, and more than the kind of roller coasters that people have been on and that kind of thing. So it was a really interesting project. And since then we've been doing presentations, and we're quite active on Twitter, and yeah, kind of like a research group, and we love working together. So it's been a great experience.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Because we need more people just like you and the group that you're part of to get involved with these projects. Because I think that, we are definitely capable of doing all of that and more. It's just, putting all the resources together and somehow, so what will be your personal message again for the people? Because we definitely need more people to get involved in any category. If we think about space, it's engineering, again, astrophysics, astronomy. We need all the people again in all over the world to get involved with that. So what would you say again, why space is such important for us as species? Because a lot of us right now, during the COVID, some of us are not going that much crazy. We feel comfortable at home. We have our fireplace, we have our fridge, TVs on. We kind of feel comfortable, and I don't want to go anywhere else. So why should we go to space where it's like a cold or super hot? It depends on what side of the of the planet you are, and there's nowhere. I cannot take my dog for a walk. But it's all these kind of crazy scenarios we think about. So why we should make that kind of one of the priorities for us, as people, for the future as well.
I think the main one I tell people when they ask me why on earth you want to do medicine in space and not just medicine on Earth is that the innovations that we're talking about, there's so much research that benefits people on Earth, and this kind of timeline that we invent stuff really for space is sped up compared to Earth, because once it's tested in space, then the doctors on Earth are a bit more likely to trust it, but things tend to be very slow in terms of technology sort of catching up with medicine on Earth. So that's one of the most interesting ones. I think the power of space to inspire young people to go just even into engineering or STEM jobs is probably underestimated. I think if the more we talk about space and let them dream and let them think that they can be an astronaut if they want to, even if they don't eventually go down that path, then they've already started thinking about careers in science. And I think the power that it has to sort of make people realize that they can do something if they put their minds to it is a big one. And because I felt that myself at first, I was like, oh, just go into science and work in a lab. And then now I'm doing all this space stuff and sending experiments to space, which is pretty crazy. And I don't think many people understand why I'm doing it, but it's great fun, and often when you're doing something that you enjoy, it doesn't really feel like work. So I think my message would definitely be to get involved and just find something that you're interested in. And if it's not space in the end, then at least you've had some really interesting experiences and really good fun.
Exactly, exactly. That's what it's all about. Life is definitely about the fun, because we don't know. Again, we don't have a clock. I don't have a clock for myself, and the long how long are we going to be here? Of course, I go do train. I do eat. Kind of look what I eat. Well, at least my wife, she kind of do that for me. Because I'm not that good at it. But so. But you sometimes you think you kind of take care of yourself. Well, you never know. So you basically have to kind of enjoy every ride. It's good or bad. Try to always to see the good and the bad. And as you said,
Yeah.
this kind of situation right now, it helped us to see, a lot of good and a bad. Because in this lockdown, as you said, there's a lot of research going to, okay, what can we actually live as species on a different planets? Where we're gonna be in those domes? You cannot go for outside for a long time, and you're gonna be staying there with a group of people that you probably don't know. So, can we do those type of things in the future? And we sure can. We sure can do a lot. We just need to kind of come on the same page and understand that this is important because like at the end of the day we're just a pale blue dot. So we're
Yeah.
just that, and we can go and explore so much more because there's so much more available. Like, no, we're just scratching the surface here. There's exoplanets, and we're going behind our solar system, and it's just incredible what's probably out there. So, but for your personal view, I mean, I know it's not part of what you do, but I like to ask the question to everybody who comes on the show. What do you think about the extraterrestrial species? Is that something out there as well?
Um, I think well, I tend to think about it logically, and given how huge the universe is, it's very unlikely that we're the only ones here. But then extraterrestrial life, I think people have associated with all sorts of things, and it I don't know what form it could take. It could just be bacteria, or it could just be a strand of DNA, because amino acids were one of the first things that was sort of created on Earth. So it's hard to tell, but I think it would be very self-centered of us to think that we're the only ones alive in the universe, given how huge it is. And I think, yeah, just the size, you can't even fathom the size of the universe, let alone saying that we're on our own. But it's an interesting one, and hopefully one we'll find answers to. But again, given the distances involved, it's unlikely that we'll find the technology that we can travel those huge distances in someone's lifetime so you can get the results back and find out the truth.
Exactly. Yeah. So for the people who want to know how big is the universe, it's big. That's what
Yeah.
it's really big. I don't have a number for that, and of course, we as science because like we have to get because that's the question that what when I ask about extraterrestrial species, and of course there's all of these documentaries, if we can call them documentaries, and the movies, and of something being out there, which I think it's either artificial intelligence that will benefit the space medicine, engineering, space travel, anything. It could be that because it seems like we're kind of going that direction slowly but surely again. Because now we're speaking remotely via Zoom. I have the camera, the lights, everything. Like the amount of technology that's involved in this, it's crazy, right? But
Yeah.
we're doing this, right? We're doing this, and it's not even that. There is more advanced technology right now, just for this or for again for the space medicine, anything. But we should get some sort of probably different input into us as species to kind of to have that breakthrough moment, because as we think about we're been here still short amount of time, comparing to the dinosaurs, but everything is super slow. So
Yeah.
everything is slow. So what do you think how everything could be sped up? I mean, is there, do you see, I mean, in the future any breakthrough moment? Because I love the fact, and I'm maybe rambling too much, but when you go to the shop and you see on the clothing shop a NASA shirt or something, that's very promising to me, because I know it's going mainstream. So once it's going to get to the mainstream, to the rappers and to the stars, and everybody start to promote NASA or SpaceX or any private company, that's a good sign, because that means there will be more and more people and eyeballs involved into this, which that means
Yeah.
more people are going to pull the resources, pull the people together, which is a good sign. But besides that, do you see anything or in any time in the future kind of creating this kind of breakthrough moment?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know which one will come first, but there are two that I would identify. I think the first one will definitely be the Artemis missions and the first missions to the moon, because it had that effect with the Apollo missions. Suddenly everyone was tuning in, people all over the world, watching on TV. And I think hopefully there'll be that kind of buzz around these missions as well. It is definitely becoming mainstream, and the more we talk about it, the more we get kids involved, the more people realize that it's not sort of rocket science, as they say, then the more I think money will go into it, and we'll start getting some commercial interest as well. And then the second sort of factor that I would add to it is if we get more sort of space agencies involved, because it's quite limited right now to sort of NASA and ESA and that kind of thing. But if we start getting a lot more space agencies trying to send sort of people to various places in the solar system, I think that would be awesome. Or at least bringing them in on the work that they're doing. They're sort of working on their own space station in China as well, and hoping for missions to the moon. So I think pooling our resources and working together will be a big part of it, but also encouraging smaller agencies and smaller countries to also contribute so that their population can sort of be inspired by the people that are up in space. I think that will be a big part of making it more widespread.
Indeed, indeed. So, what about preparing myself as being one of the space tourists? Because I would love to try that, at least going in lower orbit or maybe flying to the moon. If that will be done fast enough, you know. So, is there any ways from a health perspective that I can kind of, take care of myself? Because as I mentioned, it's not going to be everybody. And of course, if somebody has a kidney stones or a history through kind of, genetic kind of, output that you have some
Yeah.
sort of a bone, lesser density in the bones. But is there any ways that you kind of prepare yourself for those future moments where you can travel to space
I
physically?
think, yeah, generally being in good health in terms of the nutrition side of thing and the exercise side of thing. Unfortunately, one of the limiting factors for many people is going to be the cost. So I guess you can prepare yourself by trying to save up.
Save up now.
Because yeah, I think the Virgin Galactic flights are about $250,000,
Wow.
which you think is an accessible number compared to the millions that they use to get to the ISS, but it's you only get sort of 5 minutes of microgravity. So once you've tasted it once, you might want to keep flying up. But just yeah, generally being in good health, and even like the kidney stones. In that situation, you probably would just wait for the kidney stones to pass, do a test, make sure you had none sort of currently, and then you could fly. So a lot of the things that we identified could be remedied, I think. It's a very small sort of amount of conditions that you have a history of, or that genetic, that would mean that you couldn't go at all. And again, I don't know if Virgin Galactic will say that anyone can't go. So realistically,
They would love to
just
say it.
being in good health.
Everybody can go, but there is a small kind of letters and in the
Yeah, you
bottom.
probably need to sign something.
Exactly. It's a business. Look, like I do understand. I love the fact again because it has to be that. It has to be through the private companies, just like Virgin Galactic or
Yeah.
SpaceX or any other private companies. Because again, there's it's still corrupt. I mean, that space agencies, the budget where it's coming from a government, and we know. I mean, what's happening with that. Of course, not gonna get into that discussion because it's never ending. But I wouldn't love to get to know a fact. As Elon Musk, I think he talked about creating Mars kind of free society, which again everybody have their own personal kind of voting rights. So there is no kind of president, and but again, I don't think that's doable. Again, in the society that we live in, because it's just I don't think there's a scenario available where somebody can travel to Mars and create a colony or put up a 10, 20, 100 people and nobody and you're basically you don't provide that information to nobody basically there's you're just free to do what you want. So I don't think that's doable. I don't think what other people think. Again, that's a very interesting perspective to have. That's very promising, futuristic. I don't know if we again ready for those moments as people because there's just so much rules and regulations, which again at the same time makes everything is very slow. But again, the future seems bright, even though we got some negative perspectives and thoughts about the future. But I think we're gonna do some incredible things as people. Because if we're gonna go down, at least go down, in a positive way, and it's a little bit more fun that way, at least. So yeah.
No, I think there's some very exciting things coming, and that's why I'm hoping that I'll sort of be doing sort of space medicine work and research, and with all the amazing people they're working at for a long time.
And what would you say again for the people that want to get kind of more education about the space medicine? Because I know we can go definitely deeply into topics, but for today, I just want to scratch a little bit of a surface for people to understand where you're working from, what angles are you coming from, and what type of work do you do, in general. But if they want to get more details, of course, that will be Twitter account or something else for them to get in contact and ask questions if you have time to answer those. But what will be kind of the books or the information that will be available, or maybe YouTube videos, I don't know, that people can go and educate themselves a little bit more?
There's quite a few textbooks on space medicine, and if you're starting from scratch, and so I started getting into space medicine, I wasn't a medical student, so I was definitely feeling like I was out of place because I didn't know medicine to start with, so how can I go on to space medicine? But it makes a lot of sense, and if you're just interested in physiology and how the human body works, then you can just apply to what's happening in space. So there's quite a few textbooks, and if you're starting from scratch, there's lots of YouTube videos. I know with the Parabol ladies, we did a whole series with the University of Aberdeen Space Medicine Society, and we each gave a talk on a different topic in space medicine and made it accessible to medics and non-medics. So that's on YouTube, I think. Yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, on my Twitter, it's astrosurgery, or you can just search my name, and I'd happily point you towards sort of different areas of space medicine, or just give you a general overview and give you all the help that I can, because so many people working in the space medicine field helped me when I started out and are still helping me now, that I definitely want to pass that on.
Exactly. That's what it's all about. Awesome. So of course, as you mentioned, Twitter is going to be there, and any links that we can find is going to be there in the show notes as well. So we can go and grab these reads or watch these videos and get more education about space medicine, which is, again, it's a very, very important topic. And for the people who are watching, I know there's probably a few people who are involved here on this planet, on Earth, in medicine. So that could be something that you can do, again, for the future as well. If you were already working or considering to work in this sector, or maybe somebody who's working in space medicine. So if you can pass this episode to your friends who works or planning to work in a space field in the future, it will be good for them to kind of know that this opportunity to work with space medicine is also available, which is a very interesting field to be in. So, but for you, Eleonor, I just want to say again, big thank you for coming over today, for sharing your personal kind of passion, views, and the way you look at things and why you do what you do, which is very important. Kind of have those fundamental values that drive you, because I know it's very difficult, especially for scientists, for people who are working in these different fields. There's a lot of unknown, a lot of kind of breakthrough, a lot of kind of hitting your head against the wall. So having those values and reasons why you do what you do is very important, I think, in everything, especially in life. And so guys, again, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, again, make sure to pass this episode along. And as always, I'll see you next time. And until then, don't forget to keep exploring.